Welcome back to Taco Bowler Gaming. My name is Taco Bowler, and today we are going to begin our trade tutorial in Europa Universalis 4. Now, trade is widely considered to be the most complicated feature in the game. I think it's actually a little less complicated than land battles, but one of the things about trade is that you don't really ever have to deal with trade. Normally, you can get through a game without dealing with it too much, or just kind of, guessing and stuff, not having to worry about how it's done. You can't do that with land battles. You have to know about the morale and the discipline and your pips and your generals and all of that and the terrain and everything else. So, you have to kind of learn land battles. You don't really have to learn trade, but we're going to talk a little bit about trade. Trade in Europa Universalis 4 is separated out into these nodes. You can see on the trade map menu these nodes. You can also find them on the trade menu here. All of the nodes that I know about will show up here, as well as this icon over here is what nation controls them the most, has the most trade power in that node. You'll also see up here some modifiers that are here: trade efficiency, trade range, trade steering, global trade power, mercantilism, privateer efficiency, inland bonus, and goods produced, as well as a button to promote mercantilism. This is all on the trade menu. You can see what nations are transferring trade to you, who has embargoed you, who you have embargoes on, and then your total trade income and what percentage of your total income that is. You can see that I am making 868 ducats in 1746, which is pretty good. It's not the best, it could be, but if you've been watching my Switzerland series, you know how fast that went from 70 or 80 to 868 as I was focusing on making that happen. So how do you get money in trade? Well, the big thing to remember here as I try and zoom in, come on, quicker, is that each of these nodes you can see has little arrows that are coming out of it. So you can see that, for instance, the Tunis node has arrows that are coming in. You have an arrow that's coming in from Alexandria. You have an arrow that's coming in from, what is this, Katsina? Over here it's coming into Tunis, and then it also has several that are going out. You can see one that is going out here to Genoa, one that is going out here to Valencia. I think it's Valencia. It's a new node in this patch, yep. And then one that is going out to Sevilla right here. This is where trade flows. There are some in the game that only have arrows coming in, like Genoa. You see Genoa has 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 arrows coming in. Venice is another one. It has 1, 2, and 3 arrows coming in, none coming out. The other one with only arrows coming in is the English Channel up here. We call those end nodes. End nodes because that's where the trade ends. There are essentially the opposite. There are trade nodes that only have arrows coming out of them. For instance, I know there's ones over here somewhere where the trade begins. I think there were some that exist. I assumed that Australia was. I thought Australia was one that was like that, where it only has arrows coming out. Here's one. California. California only has arrows coming out. We would, theoretically, that would be called a beginning node, right? Now, what happens with this, with trade, is that everything has a trade value. So, if I come in here, we can see that we have a trade value. This is the amount of money that is produced by a certain thing. So you can see, 3.12, or maybe goods produced here at 0.94. I'm not sure. Oh yeah, so the trade value, we have a trade good, in this case livestock. It has a trade value of 3.40. We are producing 0.94 of that. Well, I'm not. but they are producing 0.94 of that, so the trade value here is 3.20. And essentially, trade value in some formula or another gets all calculated up for California here and results in the value of the node. Right now, that is 20.03. And then they figure out, okay, is anyone collecting that? And 6.01 ducats are collected by Portuguese California and Portuguese Cascadia, and the rest of it is expended out. And it goes out in the nodes in the directions that it is headed. So you can see part of it's headed up here, part of it's headed there, and so on. These are affected by merchants. Right now we see that Mexico and British Louisiana are using their trade power to send 11.5 of the ducats out over here. And then British Mexico is using its trade power to send 3.81 of the ducats down to Mexico. These are other nations that wield power in the node, but they're not using it. They have not put a merchant in this node, so they're not using it. As a result, what we do here, we have the 20 ducats in the node, and then we just transfer out those 20 ducats to the trade power of the nations. Whoever collects it, they get that, and then we figure out what is left, and it is divvied up based upon the trade power of the nations that are actually using their merchants. If no one was using the merchants, this 6 ducats would be retained, and then you would see it split evenly among the 4. However, if even one nation is using a merchant, then it is split up between only the nations that are using a merchant. And then that will go on. So let's look at this 11.5. That goes on. It comes over here to Mississippi. And Mississippi here, we can see that the value of the node has incoming of 13.14. 11 of that is from California, and then there's 1.64 coming in from Texas here, or from Rio Grande, which is another beginning node. Mississippi creates its own value, 2.18, and then that all is combined together, and we do the same calculation. Whoever's keeping it here, they get theirs, and then we split it up amongst the nations that are using their merchants to send it off. In this case, there's only 2 ways it can go off. We can head up here, or we can head down here. And then that continues, and that continues, and that continues until you wind up at an end node. These are extremely valuable nodes because, as you can guess, all of that transferring produces a pretty large amount. And you can see that Genoa has 315 coming in. And with nowhere else to go, all of it is retained. And so whoever is collecting in this node can essentially get that money, and we are collecting in that node. So that's where a lot of that comes from. 342 of my 800 comes from the Genoa node here, and having that node, and having 94% of it. So that is the basics of how you make money on trade. Is you want to find a place to be able to collect as much of that as you can, as far quote unquote downstream, as far down this run of value as possible, and preferably, if you can, one of the end nodes, like I have done here in Genoa. So how do you make that happen? Well, you have to figure out how to get more percentage of the trade that is of the trade power in a node, in the nodes that you want, preferably in the node you're trying to collect at, and then just kind of go downstream. So how do we figure out, what this percentage comes from? Well, we have something called trade power. Right now I have 97% of the trade power in this node, which is 2,180.351 trade power. And then Spain has 2%. They have 48 trade power. So where does the trade power come from? Well, trade power comes from a lot of things. First and foremost, trade power comes from just a province. So you can see that La Mancha here, with its gold, which currently is at 0, I assume that we have destroyed that gold production, has trade power. It gives me 6.9. Now you just saw there's over 2,000 trade power in the node, so 6.9, not really that big, but it does add up over the course of time, 2.9, 3.9, etc. The big places that trade power comes from are these centers of trade and these estuaries, or you might see things like this would help our number, but yeah, most of these are estuaries. There are some things inland that are there as well. You can see silver mine produces stuff, but yeah, just pretty much the largest points come from the centers of trade and the estuaries. So you can see that this center of trade gives me 25 trade power. That first thing right there, plus 25 trade power. The estuary gives me 10, and I have conquered all of these, and I have upgraded them. Also, you can see over here, Valencia. We can see that a level 1 center of trade gives me plus 5. A level 2 center of trade will give the person who owns it plus 10. And like I said, the world port, the number 3, gives you plus 25. You are allowed up to your total merchants in world ports. However, I wonder if that has actually changed a little bit, because I feel like I have a lot more than that, and I've been allowed a lot more than that in this particular game. But I did get a kind of point where it said, hey, you need to stop. But there's ways around that as well. Something else that you get trade power from is you have your trade capital. So every nation will have a little box like this in one of the nodes, and that is your main trading port. So every nation has that, and that gives you a certain amount of trade power. I think it's 10 trade power in and of itself. And every nation that has its main trading port in that area gets 10 from having their capital, their trade capital, there. So one of the things that you can do is to kind of exploit that by making sure that you have vassals that have their trade capital in various places. Right now, I have 3 vassals. They're all marches, really. I have Holland in the English Channel node, Genoa in the Genoa node, and Urbino in the Venice node. And I did that specifically so that each one of them would have their capital, their trade capital, in those nodes, and give me that just that little bit more trade power in their nodes. And another thing you can do is a merchant. Every merchant that you have in a place produces a little bit of trade power for you. I think it's 15 or so. And that is not nothing. Further, you can have prestige. One of the things that prestige gives you is that it helps with I think it helps with your trade efficiency. Let me see. Was it that, or was it trade power? It was trade power. So a 100 prestige is plus 15% trade power, global trade power. And of course, negative 100% prestige would be minus 15. Same with stability. If you're at plus 3, it's plus 3%, and so on. As well as, I believe, legitimacy. Certainly power projection, you can see, also affects all of that. And global trade power will give you a certain amount. So right now mine's at plus 61.8, and I think that it just kind of collects up all of my trade power in the node and then multiplies it by, adds another 61.8% to it. Mercantilism also helps a lot. You can see that mercantilism gives you extra trade power. And so I have 70% mercantilism right now, and that gives me plus 140% trade power. So each one of my provinces increases that trade power. I don't know if that is here. So yeah, you can see that this province of Toledo has a base of 30.2 trade power. However, from colonialism, so that's another thing. When you embrace colonialism, when it's in that province, it gives plus 10%. And then I have built a building, so we'll worry about buildings in a moment. And then trade power efficiency, 350%. So that all multiplies together from the mercantilism, 140%. That all multiplies together, and so that produces the 105. 30.2 has become 105, which greatly impacts how you're doing. So that's things that you can do. Another way you get power or get trade power is that you actually transfer out some of that trade power and suck it from further upstream. So everyone who has trade power in a node downstream impacts what happens upstream. That's part of why, although I do not have a single piece of land in the Safety node, I have 58% trade power in the Safety node. And that is almost exclusively from, in fact, it is exclusively from my power, my large amount of power in the Sevilla node. Remember, I had 2,000 power in the Sevilla node, and 356 of that is coming down to Safety. But Safety is not overly strong, and so it's not greatly impacted, and so that is actually a lot. And so I could theoretically impact quite a bit of what is happening down here if I wound up wanting to do that. Some other things that I don't have, the Reformed religion. One of the things that you can do with Reformed religion is give yourself 10% trade efficiency, I think it is. Another way you can get trade power, and I actually have done this, is you can steal trade power. So right now I have almost nothing in the pest node. I have one province in the pest node there, and I believe that's actually it. But I actually have 23% power in the pest node, because I have told Hungary in a recent peace deal, you have to give me half of your trade power. You get, when you click transfer trade, that is, you get half power in any node that you both share power in. So in this case, I get half of Hungary's trade power in the pest node, which was 38%. So I got 19 of it. I had 4, now I have 23. And if I wanted to use my merchant, I could send that, make that influence to send more over to Wien and Vienna, where I could then have a merchant sending it on down into the Venice node. So you can see how that happens there. Another way to get trade power is the subject interactions. Let's go back to the subjects. And what you do is that if you have a vassal or a march, and I don't know about personal unions, but I assume that probably you could do the same, you can divert trade. And that person, for the cost of 30 Liberty Desire, that nation is forced to give you 100% of their trade. Now, trade is an important income, so if you want that vassal / march to do anything for you, then you need to turn around and subsidize them. So I actually have been subsidizing Genoa. I've been subsidizing all of them. And so if I go over here, their income is 55, and 23 of it is from me. But they've given me all of their trade. I find that as long as you're interacting in that node, which I am, I have a merchant in each of these nodes, then you do actually gain more money by collecting all the trade together and influencing together than you do separately, especially if you have been increasing your mercantilism and your trade efficiency and stuff like that. So it's good, I think, to do that if you have the Liberty Desire, to go ahead and divert trade and then subsidize. Not only do you have, you get the benefits of receiving subsidies plus 15, and also you get a little bit of profit coming off of that interaction. Another way to get trade power, and in fact it's a really, really important amount of trade power at this point in the game in the late 1700s or mid 1700s, is by light ships. Every light ship that is projecting or protecting trade in a node, so let's go to a light ship fleet here. I have them on a mission, select mission, and protect trade, and I have them protecting trade. And I don't know where they were. Looks like they're heading down, so I assume that they were the one protecting trade in Tunis. So they provide trade power as well. Every single boat provides trade power, in this case 5. And so that is 40 times 5 trade power in this node. And I have one in quite a few nodes right now. I have one in the Ivory Coast, in the Caribbean, in Tunis, in Ragusa, in Alexandria, in the English Channel, and in Sevilla. And each one of them is producing 40 times 5 trade power, which is, I think, 200? Yeah. So that's not nothing, especially in a place like Tunis, where the total trade power is only, looks like 1460 something, 1470 something. So that's very, very good. Some other ways that you can get more percentage is to take it away from others. So you can steal it in a piece, obviously. If I had conquered Tunis, which I think I actually did, and told them to transfer my trade power, or transfer their trade power, again, that would be removing from them. You can embargo them, and embargoes have an efficiency. It's improved by mercantilism, and everything that you both have trade power in, their trade power would be reduced by the fact that you are embargoing them. Their trade power will be reduced by the amount of trade power you have, given the efficiency, and you can see that in the trade menu. Embargo efficiency is currently 35%. However, if you embargo someone who's not your rival, then you can run into some problems. I think it's trade efficiency that gets hit for the embargo. You're going to find a costly embargo gets put up here. And right now I don't have that many rivals. I have the Ottomans, and I have truce with the Ottomans, and you cannot embargo anyone who you have truce with. And Great Britain's my ally, so I'm not going to do that either to rival them. Sometimes it can be prudent to do that embargo, even if it costs you, but usually not. The only people you want to embargo normally are the ones who are your actual rivals. The last way you can get trade power, or you can take it from someone else, is to privateer. So if I wanted to, instead of collecting here, I could actually privateer with this fleet. Or I could privateer in, say, Bordeaux, because I'm not utilizing this trade power in the slightest. Or I could privateer in Constantinople, where again, I'm not utilizing that trade power. And what that would do is that all of the trade power from the light ships in the fleet that is doing the privateering would come over and would let's go ahead and privateer in Constantinople. So I'm going to go ahead and let them move over there, because they have to be present in order to that. So they are now over here. They're doing their stuff. We've done a monthly tick. And so now there is pirates over here. So all of the amount of trade power from the light ships multiplied by my privateering efficiency is now registering in the node. So it is collecting 47% of the trade power in the node, which is 60.4 total that gets collected, and that gets recorded under spoils of war. So right now I'm collecting 13.68 right there, just from privateering, which is actually probably better than where I had them protecting trade in Tunis. So that's one way that you can also kind of weaken your enemies and steal them. Now, the Ottomans can deploy their fleet in the mission of hunt pirates, and that would decrease the privateer efficiency in that area based upon how well they're doing. And I think that that is going to be dealing with their heavy ships, their galleys that are in that fleet that would be doing that, and that would reduce that. And they probably will react that way, so that would probably go down next time. Basically, you only want to privateer in a place that you're not actively using or profiting from. So if you have cut off things, let's say you're playing in Spain and you've taken all of this and you're collecting here, you're trying to stop everything here, then you might privateer in Genoa if you don't have any trade power over there, so that everything coming in from the east you can still get a share of. Otherwise, you want to be protecting trade with your light ships. And if you do find that pirates are a problem in some of your nodes, you might send your fleet out to guard against them. For instance, Great Britain, there is a pirate presence in the English Channel, although it's not that much. So that's kind of where you have that, and what you can get for trade and how you can get trade power. I will mention that the last thing is with ideas, and that is trade ideas. Trade ideas don't give you directly trade power, although global trade power, so that would increase by 20% every single bit of trade power you're getting. So every single source of it gets increased by 20% there. But usually what it's trying to do is trade efficiency. You can see that goes up, trade steering goes up, so the amount that you're sending out is increased by 25%, so now it's 125% of what came in now goes out with the merchants. Caravans would be interior trade nodes, and you get merchants. You have 1, 2, and 3 merchants. So if you're really wanting to get trade ideas is important, and also trade ideas gives you a lot of policies that also deal with trade. You can see trade efficiency there with economic ideas. Goods produced is production, but production and trade are brought together. Trade efficiency from innovative ideas, trade steering from defensive ideas, pretty much all of them are dealing with trade, and this is pretty much the only place where you're going to get trade based policies, is if you have trade ideas. And almost exclusively, they will deal with trade in the policies. So that's some of the things that you can actually be doing to improve your trade and get it to a high number like 869 or even more. So now I want to talk about merchants. You can see that I have several merchants here. And one thing is that you can do things with the merchants. You can do 2 things with them. You can collect from trade, and you can transfer trade. Now, your main trading port will collect trade in the node where it is. If you have the right DLC, you can move it with this button here. My main trade port is already located in that node. If I wanted to, I could move my main trading port to Sevilla, and then that little button would move over here, and we'd start collecting in Sevilla. I do not want to do that, but that is one place that is collecting. You can then collect with a merchant. I recommend collecting with a merchant in your node, because that adds a little bit more trade power and also a little bit of efficiency to the collection. You can collect more by having that merchant collect in your home node. However, if you collect anywhere else, there is a penalty to that. I don't know how much that penalty is in reality. It usually isn't that bad, but in early game it might be really, really bad. So certainly at the beginning of the game you want to set your merchants where you're collecting in your home node, and then one downstream. So in this case I'd either go to Tunis or Valencia, wherever I had the highest percent, and then transfer from there. Or I guess Ragusa as well would do that. So that would be the basic gist. We would try and transfer from there. As you get more merchants, as you get more trade power, you have to make decisions about where you're actually utilizing those merchants and where you're collecting and where you're transferring from. But that's the basic idea. You can collect with your merchant, and that will stop the trade, right? You become one of those green nations that is collecting before it gets transferred on. So in this case, you would become here, and then you would remove yourself from this stuff, which means you get yours first for whatever percentage that you have. However, if you do transfer the trade power, then it moves on. The merchant actually adds a bonus to being transferred, so the actual sheer amount that is being transferred out actually gets multiplied by the number of merchants who are doing the transferring. That is another reason to have a march here in like Genoa, is that, remember, Genoa has some trade power that gets shifted up. They have a little bit of trade power. They have, I have it all, but they actually have some up here, and they could use their merchant to transfer as well, and that would be 2 merchants that are going if I had a merchant here and transferring it up, or it could be a 3rd merchant, a 4th merchant, etc. And so what you can do is you can start to chain those together, and you can get quite a bit of good stuff together to make that happen. I don't know if I have any of those chains happening right now. I've got my merchants pretty well split up. But I guess I have a little bit of a combination here. So I have Congo. I have 37% power in the Congo, and that is exclusively from the Ivory Coast power seeping in, and I'm using that with a merchant, and so that is being, whatever is coming out is being multiplied, and it's going over to the Ivory Coast, where I am also transferring. So I've collected all that up, and now I'm transferring out. It's being sent to Sevilla. So now we had the multiplication here. Now we're going to multiply it again, coming out to Sevilla with that merchant, and coming up to Sevilla, I have another merchant where that can be multiplied again. And if I wanted to, I could actually have another merchant in Valencia and multiply it again before heading off into Genoa. And that wouldn't be a terrible idea if I didn't like where my merchants were. So one of the things I could do is to say, you know what, that 20.83 heading into Venice, not that big of a deal. Let's actually get a little bit more trade even than where we were. So you'll notice I am doing a trade-off here, right? I no longer am influencing in Vienna. So that went down from 20 to 5, but I'm multiplying what gets sent over to Genoa, and I think that actually went up about to 20-ish. And so I would be making a little bit more, and then you know that gets sent off to Genoa, where I collect 94% of it. For the most part, that's something you can do. I do think that it was better to have it here, but it's going to be really, really close in this particular case. But you just basically what you're trying to do with trade is you're trying to just guess and check, right? You're just guessing and checking. You can make educated guesses, and hopefully after this video you can make a little bit more educated guesses, either this video or the next video when we start talking about what to do and the general rules of thumb and strategies that I tend to use. So how do you get more merchants? You have a couple of ways. You start with 2. Every nation starts with 2 as a base merchant, and then you can get some more. If you are a merchant republic, which like Venice or Dithmarschen or something like that, if you are a merchant republic, or not Dithmarschen, Lübeck, then you get an extra one just by being a merchant republic. There are some ideas and some policies. Like I said, the trade ideas, you get 3 there, and then you can see some policies. Plutocratic ideas, aristocratic ideas give you a merchant, defensive ideas gives you a merchant. So there's ways to get merchants that way by activating those policies. And then if you have Wealth of Nations, you can create something called a trade company. And in the Emperor patch, that became, you can create a trade company anywhere outside your super region. Which for me, being my capital being in Switzerland here, my super region was Western Europe. So in theory, I could create a trade company anywhere. In fact, I could create a trade company in Ragusa. I cannot create a trade company in Venice. This is where I guess Western Europe ends. But I could actually create a trade company in Ragusa. Now, if you create a trade company, that unstates what you have for the provinces. So you can add by individual province. You can click a button. You can't do that there. So I guess the only way I can do that is to do this here. Assign provinces to a trade company, and that will assign every province you own in that node to the trade company, which will unstate it if you have stated it. You cannot have a state and be in a trade company, but right now I have not stated it. So let's go ahead and show what happens here. So we assign that to a trade company, and this is actually a good test. That trade company becomes a subject over here. So we have the Swiss Balkan Trade Company. If the trade company has 50% trade power, then you get a merchant. So you can see that I have the Swiss Barbary Company in Tunis. They have 92% trade power, so they're giving me a merchant. The Swiss Guinea Company, which is down in the Ivory Coast, has 82% power. They're giving me a merchant. This should, in theory, give me a merchant for Ragusa. Probably have to wait for the monthly tick to say, hey, we actually have that. We have 66%. Now, what I don't know is whether that actually will happen or not. It's not strong enough yet. It has 39% there, so it must be because I have selected transfer trade power with somebody that's giving me that. So, okay. But had it been, then it will. I was wanting to test because I didn't know if, with the Emperor patch, if they made it so that the trade companies that weren't in the original trade company spots gave a merchant or not. Apparently they do, because Tunis is giving me one. So that's one way you can get a merchant, and then the other way is through colonial nations. So I have 2 colonial nations. I have one in Brazil, right here, called Staging Point, and one in the Caribbean called Trade Hub. Oh, hey, I've got 2 places over there. I didn't realize it took. And any colonial nation that has 10 provinces in it will also give you a merchant. And so I have merchants there. And so that all collects up to, right now, 11 merchants. And I have a maximum of 11 level 3 places, which I have utilized in the main node I'm collecting in here in Genoa, and then going downstream where there is competition. That was the basic idea there. There are a few other things, decisions, things like that, that can give you a merchant or 2, here or there. Found Indian Trade Company being the biggest one. If you own a port province in India, China, Japan, or the East Indies, you can do that, and that will give you a merchant there. So you want to get as many merchants as you can. If you are going to try and maximize trade, you want to get as many merchants as you can. The last thing I want to talk about before we get into strategies is buildings. Here you kind of have to micro a little bit, but there are a couple of buildings that deal with trade. This deals with production, workshops, and counting houses, but the higher the trade value in the area, the higher the production. So that kind of is a benefit of it, but you can get some pretty solid amount of money by building these production buildings. But the main trade buildings are over here with manufacturing. This will be the local goods produced. So if you remember, Well, La Mancha is a bad thing. So this is the price of the trade good, and then the local good produced is that. So that produces the trade value, your trade good times the local goods produced. So if you can increase the local goods produced, that's really good. And a manufacturer will increase it by a total of 1, which if you remember back in California, that province had 0, had less than 1 to begin with, so it would double that there. I built a manufactory everywhere I can, or almost everywhere I can, everywhere that has a building slot. So that is one of the big ways you can increase trade, and then you can increase trade power through these buildings up here. However, these buildings are not worth it unless you're building them in very specific places. Mainly, you want to build these where you have trade ports, and not only trade ports, but trade ports that you're going to upgrade, and probably even upgrade to level 3, because that local trade power of plus 50, is pretty good. So, for instance, here, not only level 3, but also level 3 in places where you're going to use your merchant. So, for instance, in Kaor is down here. I actually am using that merchant. This is the Ivory Coast trade node. I am using that merchant, so that extra 20 trade power that I would get from building this building here will actually benefit me. It'll increase my trade power in the node from 2,393 to over 2,400. So in estuaries and in centers of trade, this is where you want to build those buildings, especially early on. At the end, 380 is not worth it, but in a lot of cases, I've already built a building there, and so it would just be upgrading, which is a little bit less of a cost. Early game especially, building these in centers of trade that you own will greatly impact your share of the trade power in that particular node. But if it's not a place you own, then, or if it's not a center of trade, it's just not going to do very much. 2.88 trade power, even in the beginning of the game, wouldn't really be that significant. I think I'm going to end this here as part 1. That's the explanation of trade, the mechanics of trade, and what they're doing. I've gone a couple of months. Let's go ahead and see if the Ottomans have responded over here. They have not. Not really. So there you go. And the Mamluks are also pirating up here in Constantinople. So that's the basic things with that. Next time we're going to come in and talk about some of my strategies and my rules of thumb for what to do with trade. I hope you have enjoyed this. If you did, please like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends, all of that stuff down below. I'll see you next time.